Have you ever wondered what truly drives someone on an unyielding quest for something seemingly unattainable? What if this pursuit, fueled by devastating loss, could distort one's very essence, leading them down a path they swore to fight against? Prepare to delve into the mind of Sasuke Uchiha, a character who became a reflection of what he most despised, and discover how pain and power can redefine an individual's destiny. In the vast and complex shinobi world, where clan strength shaped destinies and extraordinary abilities were the norm, young Sasuke Uchiha grew up under the prestige of a revered name. The Uchiha clan, one of Konoha's most powerful families, was known for its unique lineage and the Sharingan, an ocular dojutsu that granted incredible powers. Sasuke, the youngest son, saw in his older brother Itachi not just a relative, but an icon of excellence, a source of genuine admiration and a safe haven of affection. Sasuke's family life was an oasis of peace, filled with laughter and the promise of a bright future. He was a boy with common dreams for his age, to surpass Itachi and, in doing so, honor his clan's ancient legacy. Developmental psychology teaches us that the early years of life and family interactions are fundamental for identity formation. For Sasuke, this foundation was unquestionably solid. He was anchored in a deep sense of belonging and pride. His world, though set in a reality of ninjas and conflicts, was a safe refuge. The desire for validation and the pursuit of a prominent place, driven by his admiration for Itachi, were pure and understandable emotions for a child growing up with high expectations. The family structure provided a sense of stability and a clear path forward, with his brother serving as a guide and a goal to be achieved. However, behind the facade of normalcy, there was a dark current few could discern. Murmurs about the Uchiha's history, the village's distrust, and latent tensions were signs that, in Sasuke's childhood, went unnoticed, overshadowed by his innocence. He didn't know it, but his destiny was about to be rewritten by an unspeakable tragedy. But there was something no one saw coming, a shadow creeping through the streets of Konoha, ready to swallow everything Sasuke loved. The moment of rupture in Sasuke's life was more than an event. It was a cataclysm that shattered his soul and plunged him into an abyss of darkness. The night the Uchiha clan was brutally annihilated is a wound that never healed. The image of Itachi, his brother, the hero, standing over the bodies of their parents, with cold eyes and cruel words that Sasuke wasn't even worth eliminating, pulverized the boy's world. This devastating experience and overwhelming trauma not only took his family, but stole his childhood and planted the seed of a single, all-consuming emotion: the unwavering desire for revenge. From that point, Sasuke began a profound metamorphosis. From a boy with common dreams and aspirations, he transformed into someone consumed by a dark, almost existential purpose. His internal conflict was palpable. The love and deep admiration for Itachi were violently replaced by a burning hatred and agonizing incomprehension. Itachi's figure, once a beacon, became the target of his fury. Externally, he closed himself off from the world, the shadow of trauma accompanying him every step. His previously open and confident personality gave way to gloomy introspection and self-imposed isolation. Trauma psychology elucidates that such drastic and abrupt events can trigger PTSD, where the individual constantly relives the traumatic event and desperately seeks ways to cope with the pain, often adopting destructive or obsessive coping mechanisms. For Sasuke, revenge was not just a goal, but the only path he saw to process this searing pain and give some meaning to his fragmented existence. Each grueling training session, each new skill he mastered, and even the ephemeral relationships he built were seen through the distorted lens of his ultimate goal: to become powerful enough to confront and eliminate Itachi. Every day, the obsession rooted itself deeper, and the flame of revenge burned brighter, consuming everything in its path. And it was there that everything began to crumble. Innocence was incinerated, and a new version of Sasuke, driven by resentment, was born from the ashes. As time progressed, Sasuke's mind, once home to innocence and simple aspirations, began to be inexorably distorted in an insatiable quest for power. His training in Konoha, while seemingly a normal part of his ninja journey alongside Naruto and Sakura, was in fact a testing ground for his dark purpose. He not only wanted to be strong, but needed to be the strongest, surpassing anyone who dared to equal him. His actions and words, such as the constant and almost desperate comparison with Naruto and his impatience with his own limits, revealed the feverish urgency burning within him. The obsession with revenge was no longer a mere desire. It had become the central axis of his existence, and every decision, no matter how radical, was rationalized and justified based on this primary goal. Anyone who stood in his way, or whom he perceived as an obstacle to his evolution, was viewed with contempt or as an adversary to be overcome without mercy. To penetrate the complexity of what was going on in Sasuke's mind, we can draw a parallel with cognitive psychology. His mind developed a remarkable confirmation bias. He interpreted every event, every interaction, and every new piece of information through the distorted prism of his revenge. The suffering he experienced was not a burden, but a fuel that fed his relentless determination, and the idea of justice, his own dark and twisted version of it, was the desired reward. He convinced himself that absolute power was the only currency to achieve his goal, and that any sacrifice, no matter how costly, was fully justifiable in its name. The insidious influence of Orochimaru, with his promises of overwhelming power, only reinforced this already ingrained belief, leading him to break ties with Konoha and plunge into a path of isolation in search of a strength that, he believed, only the path of darkness could offer. He saw Orochimaru as a means to an end, a catalyst for the evolution of his power. At this point, the shadow that once merely lurked began to solidify, revealing the outline of something far more sinister. But the true monster, even more complex and dangerous, was still dormant, waiting for the right moment to emerge. The most symbolic and irreversible act of total transgression in Sasuke's trajectory occurred when he deliberately abandoned Konoha and sealed his alliance with Orochimaru, marking his point of no return. This decision was not merely an act of flight. It was a conscious and calculated choice to shed any ties that, in his perception, represented weakness or hindered his ascent to power. Sasuke's worldview underwent a drastic and irrevocable alteration. Camaraderie, a sense of belonging, and shared ideals were replaced by a cold pragmatism, where the ultimate goal of revenge fully justified any means. He was unequivocally willing to sacrifice deep friendships, abandon his own ideals, and even compromise his own soul in his relentless pursuit of power and, consequently, the annihilation of Itachi. At this stage of his journey, Sasuke's morality and ethics became fluid, shaped and distorted by the intensity of his pain and the depth of his obsession. He meticulously rationalized his actions, justifying them as strictly necessary steps to achieve the justice he believed he deserved, a justice that only he could impose. The betrayal of his friends, the relentless pursuit of limitless strength, and the willingness to engage in questionable and morally ambiguous practices with Orochimaru were viewed by him not as acts of evil, but rather as the inevitable price to pay for his personal redemption. It is at this point that the viewer is compelled to confront a disturbing dilemma. What if, in his own mind, distorted by pain and loss, he is right? His pain was undeniably real, his loss immense, and the feeling of betrayal he believed he had suffered drove him. Could it be that, in a universe where revenge is a possible and even validated path by some, his choices, no matter how dark and questionable, could be understood from a different perspective? This question not only haunts us, but forces us to confront the intrinsic fragility of our own values and principles when faced with the abyss of another's suffering. Sasuke's trajectory challenges us to look beyond appearances and try to understand the logic. However perverse it may seem, that can arise from unspeakable trauma. He didn't just cross a line. He obliterated it, and the path ahead was only darkness. As Sasuke's journey delved deeper into the shadows, his logic, though unequivocally distorted by pain, began to weave a hauntingly coherent meaning within his own particular universe. Psychological analysis here reveals a pattern of behavior that, in retrospect, is not only understandable, but almost inevitable. The awakening of the Mangekyo Sharingan, a cataclysmic event that occurred after the final confrontation with Itachi, and the subsequent and devastating revelation of the truth about his brother, not only granted him immense and overwhelming power, but also further intensified and polarized his worldview. The visceral need to destroy Konoha, the village he came to see as truly responsible for Itachi's tragic fate and his clan's annihilation, emerged as his new and primary obsession, a goal as visceral and dominant as the original revenge against Itachi himself. We can draw striking parallels with the theory of cognitive dissonance, a fundamental concept in social psychology. Sasuke, upon discovering the shocking and painful truth that Itachi had acted out of a deep and unconditional love for Konoha, under direct orders from the village itself, faced a reality that directly clashed with all the hatred and resentment he had cultivated for years. To reduce this unbearable dissonance between his previous belief and the new truth, he did not abandon hatred, but brutally and relentlessly redirected it towards Konoha. Guilt for his traumatized mind needed to be attributed to someone, and the village that ordered the extermination of his clan became the new and main target of his fury. This redirection of anger, while seemingly completely irrational to an outside observer, was Sasuke's desperate way of maintaining his internal coherence and justifying the destructive path he had already taken. He became unshakably convinced that destroying Konoha was the only legitimate way to honor Itachi's supreme sacrifice and purge the stain on his clan, re-establishing justice on his own terms. This was not madness in the traditional sense of the word. It was a cold and ruthless calculation, based on a logic of revenge built upon trauma and a brutal reinterpretation of the truth to perfectly fit his narrative of untold pain, loss, and suffering. His mind, though wounded, operated with relentless determination, seeking a way to channel the fury that consumed him. What truly remains after destruction, after revenge has been consumed, and after all the detours taken in the name of an obsession? For Sasuke, the path of chaos and isolation he treaded, no matter how much power he accumulated, led him to an existential void, even after, in a way, achieving his goals. Itachi's defeat and Obito's subsequent and painful revelation of the truth about his brother did not bring the peace or clarity he had expected. Instead, they deepened his internal conflict, redirecting his fury towards Konoha and the system that, in his tormented mind, had corrupted and annihilated his clan. This incessant journey of hatred and the search for a new enemy shaped him into someone who, though possessing overwhelming power, was fundamentally lost and disoriented. He became a walking paradox, a being of immense power, but with a deeply wounded soul. Sasuke's eventual return alongside Naruto in the Fourth Great Ninja War and the final confrontation with Kaguya represent a crucial turning point, but not a total and immediate redemption. His epic fight against Naruto after the war, driven by a distorted vision of how true peace should be achieved, demonstrates the persistence and tenacity of his traumatized psyche and his difficulty in abandoning old patterns. The psychology of forgiveness and acceptance is of paramount importance here. Sasuke only begins to find a tangible path to reparation and the reconstruction of his own identity when he finally accepts Naruto's unconditional forgiveness and begins to understand the depth of his own mistakes and misconceptions. He did not become a hero in the traditional sense, with a flowing cape and public recognition. Instead, he transformed into an agent of darkness, serving the light, traveling silently through the world, acting in the shadows to prevent the same tragic mistakes of the past from repeating. He became the hidden vigilante, the silent guardian. Deep philosophical reflections emerge from his journey. Who are we to judge? With our limited perspective, the complex journey of someone forged in the incandescent furnace of such unspeakable trauma. The thin line between hero and villain becomes irrevocably blurred when one can understand the true origin of the pain and suffering that shaped their choices. Sasuke's story is a mirror reflecting the consequences of loss and revenge, but also the possibility of redemption, however painful and gradual. But perhaps he was not the last to tread such a complex path, a path where darkness intertwines with light in the search for meaning.